The Mothman Prophecies. When Point Pleasant's grief became a dark carnival, and the Phantom Bridge returned. The Silver Bridge died on a cold December night, but the story refused to sync with twisted eye-bars and lost commuters. In the months that followed, Point Pleasant survived by rolling bandages over a fracture that would never quite set. Volunteer soup lines, hastily built detours, federal hearings that offered explanations without comfort. 2 years later, John Keel gathered the rumors, affidavits, and sleepless speculation into the Mothman Prophecies. His prose read like a flashlight beam in fog, half illumination, half deeper shadow, and the book sold briskly on drugstore spinners beside tabloids that promised demon babies and Elvis sightings. Skeptics scoffed, believers nodded, and the rest of America moved on. Point Pleasant could not. Bills kept coming while factories closed, and grief offered no refund policy. So the town let artists repaint cracked brick with winged silhouettes, let entrepreneurs order t-shirts by the bale, let teenage bands tune guitars where river water had once lapped at recovery barges. Most folks swallowed their qualms because the cash registers finally rang again, even if the chime echoed like a funeral bell. Our new story begins here, 3 summers after Keel's publication, on a humid June morning when the last of the railroad embankment rubble was hauled away and a spray-painted sign appeared downtown. Festival of Legends. This Saturday only. The letters dripped crimson onto sidewalk dust, and nobody claimed authorship. In a town where memory itself felt haunted, the sign looked less like an invitation than a dare. Chapter 1. Murals, Merch, and Misgivings. By sunrise the next day, a pop-up crew of college painters from Columbus crowded the courthouse wall. They toted scaffolding, industrial buckets of blood moon red, and stencils shaped like unfurled wings. Their leader, a lanky art student named Elijah Frost, claimed the design would celebrate local mythos while projecting post-industrial resilience. Few residents understood the jargon, but the town council had approved anything that sounded like free publicity. Claire Danner, Tri-County Observer staff reporter and lifelong skeptic of miracles, parked across the street with a notebook balanced on her steering wheel. She counted 7 painters, all strangers, none older than 22. Youthful optimism spackled onto a tragedy they had never tasted. Behind her, the river market bustled with new inventory. Pewter Mothman keychains, snow globes containing tiny girders floating in glitter, a novelty lamp cast in the shape of John Keel's first edition. Henry Rollins, owner of the market stall, stacked boxes while muttering calculations. He had been on Pier 3 the night the bridge folded. His limp still ached when humidity rose, but the souvenir margin eased the pain. By noon, tempers flared. Mayor Catherine Holt arrived in a powder blue suit and took issue with the color palette. Too apocalyptic, she feared, for the Chamber of Commerce brochure. Elijah argued the palette represented collective trauma refracted through modern myth. Catherine threatened to revoke the mural permit. Elijah offered to remix his crimson with sunset gold. Compromise was brokered over lukewarm iced tea delivered by Catherine's assistant, and paint rollers resumed their hypnotic rise and fall. That evening, Claire strolled the riverbank seeking quotes for tomorrow's column. A makeshift stage had already sprouted on the lawn, its plywood floor creaking under amps and drum kits. The headliner, a folk rock trio called the Parallax, sound-checked a haunting minor chord progression that reminded Claire of midnight train whistles. Families set up lawn chairs, teenagers chased one another with neon bubble guns, and vendors skewered sausages that hissed like shorted wires. As dusk pooled along the Ohio River, a hush swept the crowd. For a heartbeat, every generator, speaker, and unsettled raven seemed to inhale at once. Then, above the half-finished mural, a distant reflection pulsed on the courthouse's upper windows, 2 crimson orbs that flickered twice before fading. Most onlookers dismissed it as taillights or camera flash, Claire felt the hair rise on her arms anyway, not from fear of monsters, but from the unsettling way grief sometimes personified itself. At 10:12 p.m., the mural's base coat dried enough for Elijah to climb down. He stepped into the glow of street lamps to admire his work. Only then did he realize someone had added a detail without permission. A sliver-thin silhouette lodged between the sweeping wings, 14 inches tall, painted a shade darker than the brick so it almost escaped notice. Its eyes, however, were perfect circles of luminescent white, still wet, still dripping. No one on Elijah's team admitted the addition. The police chalked it up to pranksters. Catherine called for a quick repaint before the Saturday festival. Yet the following dawn, the unauthorized eyes returned, this time brighter, the drips now branching like veins. That evening, teenagers claimed the silhouette shifted when no one looked directly at it, the brick seeming to exhale dust, as if the wall itself were breathing. Claire Danner filed her article at midnight, ending with a sentence she regretted the moment she hit send. Point Pleasant may have lost its bridge, but it has gained a mirror, one that reflects what we fear to see. The editor kept the line. The next morning, the Observer's circulation doubled. Chapter 2. The Carnival of Shadows. It was the kind of morning that tricked Point Pleasant into optimism. Hazy sunshine, river fog burned off by 9, cicadas humming as if auditioning for the Saturday street fair. Vendors erected white pop-up tents along Main, unfurling banners that read, Festival of Legends. Claire Danner drifted through the setup, notebook pressed to her chest like a shield. Everywhere she turned, profit clung to sorrow the way ivy clings to brick. A burly man in a See the Mothman, Feed the Buzzard shirt spoke into a bullhorn, directing traffic toward $15 parking. Near the courthouse, Elijah Frost and his crew balanced on scaffolding, rolling the final gold highlights onto the wings while a policeman watched for another nocturnal vandal. The secret silhouette, tiny, black, bright-eyed, remained. Town council voted to leave it alone after Catherine Holt's compromise decree, Let Legend Lie Where Legend Wishes. The vote was unanimous. No one wanted fresh bad press. Beneath the clatter of tent poles and speaker stands, the Ohio River whispered like an old conspirator. At the edge of the lawn stood a folding table stacked with paperback copies of The Mothman Prophecies, each wrapped in glossy plastic. The bookseller, Cecilia C.C. Holmes, import-export entrepreneur and rumor hound, talked up Keel's prose with a Carnival barker's cadence. True story, folks. John Keel kept index cards of every eyewitness old Point Pleasant produced. That's commitment, not fiction. $10, read after dark if you dare. A boy of 14 lingered, counting allowance bills. Claire recognized him. Tommy Rollins, Henry's nephew, orphaned by the collapse and raised on his uncle's gift shop spoils. Tommy paid, pocketed his copy, and hurried off with the nervous gait of someone balancing contradictory hopes, one for supernatural wonder, one for mundane safety. Claire tipped her head at Cece in greeting, received a wink back, and continued toward River Park. That's when the air changed. A locomotive's mournful horn sounded from the distant rail junction. Normal, except the note quavered halfway through, rising an octave too high, like metal screaming. Vendors froze mid-hammer, turning toward the tracks. Seconds later, the horn cut off, replaced by silence so abrupt, Claire felt her ears throb. Then the noise returned in smaller bursts, faint, staccato, click, click, click. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats. She knew that rhythm. The same unnatural clicking Earl Switchblade Carter reported before the Silver Bridge fell. The same pattern police scanners picked up on the anniversary last winter. Claire pulled out her pocket recorder, new technology she preferred to scribbles, and captured 10 seconds of static, interrupted by the clicks. Within minutes, the sound stopped. The festival resumed. Yet a hush had crept beneath every conversation, a bruise beneath makeup. At 11 sharp, Mayor Holt climbed the temporary stage, flanked by the chamber quartet in red blazers. She recited a speech about resilience, remembrance, and regional revitalization, peppered with phrases marketing consultants loved. Economic opportunities, heritage tourism, celebrate while honoring loss. Her voice bounced off portable PA horns, trailing across the crowd toward the courthouse mural. Claire stood near the back, jotting words she'd later transform into something less saccharine. Halfway through the speech, she noticed Elijah Frost staring past Catherine's shoulder, mouth slightly open. Claire followed his gaze. The silhouette's eyes on the wall were glowing again, bolder than last night, bright enough to register even in noon light. 2 perfect ivory discs, no electricity, no paint. For one irrational moment, Claire expected them to wink. A section of audience turned, gasped, then erupted in excited chatter. Cell flash cameras pulsed. Catherine never broke stride, though her knuckles whitened around the lectern. The chamber quartet sped up their mid-speech musical flourish, covering the murmurs with peppy brass. Minutes later, after the ribbon cutting, Catherine pulled Elijah aside behind the stage. Claire edged closer, pretending to check recorder batteries. Catherine, low, urgent. You swear your kids didn't add phosphorescent paint? Elijah, we're using hardware store latex, Mayor. Nothing glows unless you shine black light. You can inspect every can. Catherine, I've got 3 TV crews arriving by dusk. If that wall pulls a stunt on live camera. Elijah, maybe embrace it, art that responds to the community. Catherine, in a tone sharpened by grief and duty, reminded him how responding killed 46 souls the last time. Elijah fell silent. Claire filed their exchange in memory. Afternoon brought heat like wet wool. Food stalls smoked thick with pepper sausage grease. Lemonade sweat beaded on plastic cups. Children chased each other wearing novelty red-eye goggles. Buskers lined the sidewalks. One strummed acoustic ballads about the winged sentinel. Another juggled painted bowling pins that resembled vertebrae. The surreal carnival atmosphere felt an inch away from either catharsis or meltdown. Tommy Rollins sat beneath a sycamore, nose buried in Keel's book. Henry approached with 2 corn dogs kneeling beside his nephew. Henry, found anything good? Tommy, eyes wide. He says some people never see monsters because belief chooses them, Uncle. What if belief chooses me? Henry, hand gentle on Tommy's shoulder. Belief's a 2-way street, kiddo. You get to choose back. Henry handed Tommy a corn dog. The boy smiled, but his gaze drifted past Henry toward the mural eyes, as though comparing colors. Claire, perched on a picnic bench, caught the look and felt her stomach knot. At 4:30, a brief storm rolled through, summer squall, thunder like artillery, rain pounding tents. Vendors scrambled to batten flaps. Power flickered. 30 seconds of darkness thick as ink descended under the pavilion canopy. Generators whined, sputtered, then reignited string lights. When clarity returned, something had changed on the courthouse wall. The eyes were gone. Not painted over, simply absent. Where white orbs had glowed, the brick shone blank and damp. The unauthorized silhouette remained, but now looked emptier, as though its sockets had been scooped out. Spectators gathered, whispering theories. The rain washed luminous paint. The power glitch disrupted hidden LEDs. Maybe it was all mass hallucination. Elijah's crew swore they hadn't touched a brush. Catherine ordered yellow caution tape around the mural scaffold. For safety, she claimed, but the gesture felt like roping off a crime scene. Meanwhile, a rumor raced through smartphone grapevines. Someone saw twin lights drifting upriver during the blackout, bobbing like spectral lanterns. No photos surfaced, only shaky assertions posted to local message boards. Evening descended, trailed by dragon clouds and fresh humidity. The Parallax tuned their guitars, determined to salvage the schedule. Tommy Rollins slipped away from Henry, clutching Keel's paperback like a talisman. Claire noticed the child's departure and tailed him at a distance, curiosity beating out journalistic objectivity. Tommy trekked past the food stalls to Riverside Walk, where broken pilings from the original bridge still jutted like blackened teeth. He stopped at Pier 3, the one his parents' station wagon had rolled from when steel gave way. Claire held back, unwilling to intrude upon private pilgrimage. The boy removed a flat stone from his pocket, placed it at the base of the railing. It wasn't a stone, Claire realized. It was a chunk of river-smoothed concrete containing a faint seam of rusted steel. Bridge bone. Tommy whispered something she couldn't hear, then opened Keel's book to a page he'd dog-eared. He read aloud. Between the brain's signals and the cosmos's responses lies a corridor tourists seldom map. Walk it, and the universe may lean close to whisper its true name. Claire's breath caught. She knew the quote, remembered dismissing it as Keel's purple mysticism. Yet here, beneath sodium lamplight and morning river, the words felt heavier. Suddenly Tommy stiffened, his head turned upriver. Claire followed the angle and froze. Two lights hovered low over the water, 15 yards out. Perfect circles, pale as ice, neither swaying like boat lamps nor rising like stars. They advanced, gliding, silent. Claire blinked. Rationality offered no label. Tommy backed away. The lights mirrored the retreat. Claire grabbed the recorder, thumb ready, but the device displayed a blinking ERR. Static squealed from its speaker, the same 3-click pattern. She slapped it off. When she looked up, the lights were gone. A barge horn groaned somewhere beyond the bend, mundane and comforting in its banality. Tommy whispered, "It followed me." "Come on," Claire said, voice steady despite her racing pulse. "We're going back. I'll get your uncle." But when they turned, they found Henry already sprinting across the lawn, panic etched on his face. The festival stage speakers shrieked feedback. A hush rippled through the audience again. Above the courthouse, the mural's eyes had reappeared, brighter than ever, casting a faint, impossible glow onto the freshly taped caution line. And this time, every phone in the crowd captured them. Chapter 3, Pixels, Profits, and the Price of Proof. Phones rose like a forest of antennae, their tiny lenses flocking to the courthouse wall. A hush spread, broken first by gasps, then by the frantic shutter whir of camera apps. In every frame, the eyes glowed, white-hot pinpricks that seemed to pulse with a heartbeat all their own. Claire Danner forced herself to keep reporting instincts ahead of panic. She shot a dozen photos, rolled video, then turned the recorder back on. This time it behaved, capturing the crowd's tremor-thick voices. "Is that real paint? Someone's projecting holograms. My God, it's actually brightening." On stage, the Parallax abandoned their opening chord, all three musicians staring open-mouthed. Mayor Catherine Holt stepped to the mic, but no one heard her. The PA system squealed, then died altogether. The hush blurred into a single communal breath. From behind the caution tape, Elijah Frost stared upward, fingers slack around a paint roller. He looked as though an unseen hand had drained the color from his face, leaving his irises almost ghost pale. "It's never done that," he whispered to himself, though Claire caught the words, committed them to memory. Across the lawn, Henry Rollins hauled Tommy into a fierce embrace. The boy didn't struggle, just watched the mural with solemn fascination, as if some private treaty had been confirmed. News travels faster than any raptor. By midnight, grainy videos hit regional Facebook groups, then the wider internet. Each clip featured the same impossible luminescence, accompanied by a rising chorus of frightened or ecstatic onlookers. Hashtags erupted. Mothman lives, EIs, on the wall, point pleasant prophecy. Television vans lined Main Street by dawn, dish antennas blooming like silver mushrooms from their roofs. Reporters elbowed past one another for the best angle. Technicians strung cables across sidewalk cracks, still bearing 1967 chalk marks. Local deputies rerouted traffic, but nothing stopped the spectacle from hemorrhaging throughout breakfast table TV. Claire's Tri-County Observer webpage crashed twice under record clicks. Her editor begged for hourly updates. She filed a running chronology, careful to label every phenomenon as alleged or apparent, a skeptic's talisman against hyperbole. Yet inside she felt a tremor of guilty excitement. The story had leapt off her pages, become its own narrator. Scientists followed the television vans. First came Dr. Willa Kent of Ohio State's Department of Optical Engineering, a petite woman with a bun so taut it seemed laser sculpted. She set up a portable spectrometer, aiming its snout at the mural while assistants unfurled sunshade tarps. Dr. Kent, if there's an energy source, we'll catch its signature. She spoke calmly, but Claire noticed the doctor's hands trembled when she adjusted the tripod. Beside them, a duo representing the West Virginia University folklore program interviewed residents with clipboards printed in Mothman silhouettes. Dr. Lionel Wu, folklorist, quoted Keel verbatim, "A distortion in human perception can become self-sustaining once mythology supplies the scaffolding." "That's academic for mob hysteria," Elijah muttered near Claire. She jotted the quip. Police Chief Ray Delgado cordoned the mural again and ordered hourly patrols. He allowed scientists through, but no volunteers. When a group of amateur ghost hunters arrived wielding EMF meters and Ouija boards, Ray marched them back to their van, yet no one could cordon the sky. Each dusk, when the courthouse shadows stretched long, the eyes brightened, never during full sun, always at civil twilight, as though the brick required the world to dim before it could speak. With spectacle came commerce. Pop-up vendors slapped the glowing eyes onto enamel pins, posters, and battery-powered lapel buttons that flashed random pulses. CC Holmes sold out of Keel paperbacks by Tuesday, reordered 3 cases, and unveiled a collector's edition featuring a sticker of the courthouse silhouette. Mayor Holt floated the idea of prolonging the Festival of Legends, citing unprecedented visitor revenue. Council approved a 2-week extension. Carnival rides appeared, semis hauling tilt-a-whirls where FEMA trailers had once parked. The midpoint between Remembrance and Circus narrowed to a hairline. Claire's inbox flooded with interview requests from NPR affiliates, conspiracy podcasts, even a glossy New York magazine promising a feature spread. She refused most, uncomfortable being cast as newly minted prophet. Yet the story dragged her forward like a tide. Wednesday night, 5 days after the eyes returned, Point Pleasant experienced its first blackout since 1972. At 9:14 p.m., every street lamp flickered and died. Generators at makeshift carnival stalls hiccuped, then fell silent. Silence thicker than river fog settled across town. Somewhere, a baby wailed, dogs barked in a ripple. Claire, at her apartment 2 blocks from the mural, grabbed her recorder and ran outside. Within that ink-black night, the courthouse eyes blazed, no longer white. They flickered blood orange, flaring and dimming like coals in bellows. The glow cast stark shadows across Maine, turning carnival rides into skeletal silhouettes. Claire lifted the recorder. The device spat static and the familiar click-click-click in threes. She felt sound vibrate through her jawbone, not air. Around her, people stared in mute shock, faces lit from below by the eye's fiery pulse. Then came the siren. Not the modern digital wail, but the archaic civil defense horn, identical to the one that had screamed the night of the bridge collapse. It cried once, long and hollow, from somewhere upriver where no siren tower existed anymore. The eyes snapped dark. Streetlights surged back to life. Generators gurgled into steady hum. Carnival music resumed mid-loop as if someone had only paused the record. Point Pleasant inhaled, exhaled, then broke into 100 overlapping voices, accusation, awe, prayer. The next morning's headlines asked, what triggered blackout? Rusty siren or restless soul? An emergency council session convened in the high school gymnasium. Engineers from Appalachian Power blamed a freak voltage spike. Folklorists blamed a Jungian uprising of collective grief. Dr. Kent presented spectrometer charts showing a narrow band of radiation, visible only in the window where the eyes glowed, identical to auroral emissions in the upper atmosphere. She called it localized plasma lensing. Chief Delgado asked the obvious, plasma lensing inside brick? Dr. Kent offered no answer. The council finally voted to drape the mural until further notice. At noon, firefighters hoisted a 30-foot black canvas over Elijah's artwork, banishing the famous eyes to darkness. Tourism vendors howled. Residents applauded. Tommy Rollins wept quietly beside his uncle. But by nightfall, wind tore half the shroud free. Witnesses claimed they saw no claws nor vandal, only the fabric unraveling from its hooks, pulled by a force that worked against the breeze. The exposed eye shone again, a lone beacon-piercing canvas folds like a flashlight emerging from a grave. Desperation births pilgrimage. By Thursday, fringe cultists arrived, believing the glowing eyes were harbingers of revelation. Some knelt on asphalt, chanting verses about burning wheels within wheels. A few petitioned the council for river baptism permits to cleanse under the watcher's gaze. Claire interviewed one bearded pilgrim named Amos Bright. He claimed visions of red-feathered cherubim guiding him from Georgia. When she asked why cherubim favored rural West Virginia, he replied, eyes shining with rapture, because this is the Scar of Babel, and here the tower must try again. She filed his quote, unedited. Late Friday, Dr. Kent's team discovered anomalies in thermal scans. The bricks around the silhouette registered 5 degrees colder than ambient during daylight, then 10 degrees warmer at twilight. A heat sink that became a furnace. Elijah Frost watched the data and felt something in his rational artist's heart fracture. Art can haunt, he murmured to Claire, but walls shouldn't breathe. That night, he tried to repaint the silhouette, climbing alone with a bucket of tan primer. 30 witnesses claimed the eye brightened into searing white as his brush neared. Elijah recoiled, lost balance, fell 8 feet, and shattered his wrist. In the ambulance, delirious on morphine, he grabbed Claire's sleeve. The paint isn't what glows, the paint is what keeps it inside. Saturday dawned steely and cool, the anniversary week's final fair day. Mayor Holt canceled all festival events, though vendors opened anyway, unwilling to surrender foot traffic. At noon, Chief Delgado ringed the courthouse with steel barricades. At 2:07 p.m., the eye glowed behind the torn shroud, unbidden daylight shine. Spectators outside barricades gasped. Some retreated, others surged forward. Police ordered dispersal. Then the 3-click code burst from every civilian radio in a 10-mile radius. Car stereos, baby monitors, CBs, even an unplugged tabletop Philco in Ray Delgado's office. 3 clicks, pause, 3 clicks. Claire's recorder captured it all, its digital levels spiking red. Over the clicks, a rumble rose, low, tectonic, familiar only to those who survived 1967. Structures vibrated. Wind flags snapped. Somewhere upriver, barges blew frantic horns. Tommy Rollins, clutching Keel's book, stepped to the barricade and whispered, "It's calling the pieces." Before anyone could pull him back, Pier 3's lone standing girder, rusted relic left as memorial, shook free of its concrete socket and toppled onto the riverbank with a thunder that shattered Carnival glass 2 streets away. The ground tremor ceased. Radios fell silent. The eye on the wall dimmed to gray, like an ember losing oxygen. Point Pleasant stood amid swirling dust and understood collectively that the legend had ceased to be souvenir or scholarship. It had become agency. Chapter 4. Fault lines in the living map. Point Pleasant awoke Sunday beneath a sky the color of a healing bruise, purple edging toward yellow, as though dawn itself had misremembered the order of colors. The fallen girder from Pier 3 lay splayed across the riverbank like a butchered mastodon. State engineers erected barricades and craned in spotlights, but the hulking bone of steel seemed bigger than their machines, heavier than their language. News anchors spoke of structural fatigue, yet when their cameras panned away, they shivered and caught themselves glancing at the courthouse wall as if the building might wink again. Shards and syllables. Claire Danner spent the morning cataloging broken storefront glass along Main. 3 windows at C.C. Holmes's pop-up bookstall, 2 lamps at the vintage record shop, every mirrored panel on the tilt-a-whirl. She threaded caution tape through splintered door frames, her reporter's badge doubling as volunteer tag because no civilian got paid enough to stand this close to yesterday's fear. Inside the police station, Chief Ray Delgado compared seismograph printouts from nearby Gallipolis, a microquake at 2:07 p.m., magnitude 2.1, shallow epicenter, directly beneath the courthouse square. USGS classified it tectonically insignificant. Ray wrote bullshit in red Sharpie across the report and pinned it to the evidence board. In the next cubicle, Officer Jenna Malik cued clip after clip of the eye flashing bright dim bright during the tremor. In every frame, the luminescence surged a half second before the ground shook. Correlation outran causation, but correlation still kept her wide-eyed until dawn. Plasma, ice, fire. At Ohio State, Dr. Willa Kent live-streamed her findings to a panel of skeptical physicists. The courtyard bricks emitted photons at 580-90 nanometers sodium lamp yellow, transitioning to 656 nanometers hydrogen alpha red during luminous phases, an emission rarely seen outside aurora borealis or laboratory plasma arcs. Someone on the panel joked that the courthouse must sit on a buried neon sign. Nobody laughed. That afternoon, she installed a Faraday cage scaffold in front of the mural, ringed with electromagnetic sensors. When the eye brightened, the cage registered no EM flux, but the Geiger counter taped to a side post jumped from background, 0.12 MSV HR to 3.6 MSV HR for 12 seconds. Not lethal, Kent admitted, but like standing for a minute in a dentist's X-ray. The city council clamored to seal off the courthouse entirely. The county judge reminded them the building housed 2 courtrooms and the registrar's office. Shutting it would snarl every legal docket for months. Debate spiraled into shouting, dissolved only when Catherine banged a gavel and ordered an emergency vote to relocate staff to the high school gym. Motion passed 6-1. The dissenting vote insisted, "There's no budget line for spectral litigation." Hermits of the click code. CB radio hobbyists clustered at the abandoned rail yard each sunset, antennas tilted toward the mural. They recorded hours of static, isolating the 3-click motif, slowing it 64x until the waveform resembled Morse. A cryptographer volunteered an amateur translation, repeating AWA. The call sign for the old Naval Air Weapon Annex outside Chillicothe had also been AWA. It closed in 1964 after rumored radar anomaly tests. Conspiracy forums ignited. Claire traced a Freedom of Information request and learned the annex specialized in over-the-horizon radar prototypes that frequently produced false aerial echoes. She filed the note under eerie coincidence and highlighted it orange. Tommy Rollins memorized the click pattern, tapping it on school desk legs until teachers confiscated his pencils. When detention threatened, he tapped his own knuckles instead, flesh drumming bone in triplets that left small bruises he hid under sweatshirt sleeves. Dreams on loan. By midweek, shared dreams spread like pollen. C.C. Holmes dreamt she stood inside the Silver Bridge moments before collapse, but the commuters were faceless mannequins of rough-cut wood. Elijah Frost, wrist in cast, dreamt he painted over a void instead of brick, and every brushstroke dissolved into star-speckled infinity. Chief Delgado, against uniform protocol, confessed to Claire he'd woken 3 nights in a row gasping after reliving the tremor, but each time, instead of dust, water filled the air, dark and rushing and full of pale hands. "I can't swim," he admitted, voice knotted with shame. Claire added the quote to her notes, then deleted it. Some things deserved privacy. In those same hours, commuter traffic on the new Silver Memorial Bridge dropped 40%. GPS apps flagged the span with orange caution icons uploaded by jittery drivers. No official advisory existed. Faith in steel had simply eroded. Pilgrims and profit loss. Festival vendors petitioned to reopen despite city bans. Catherine Holt compromised. Day-only hours, no amplified music, limited midway rides. Revenue spiked again. Yet each cash register chime now sounded like funeral tolls to townsfolk who remembered twisted girders. A televangelist arrived by charter bus, preaching that the glowing eye was the lampstand of revelation. He sold autographed scarves for seed faith offerings. He left town richer, the food bank no better stocked. In contrast, a coalition of bridge collapse widows hosted a candle vigil on the riverbank, reading the 46 names aloud. When they finished, the earth did not shake, but the courthouse eye dimmed to a charcoal pinprick for the entire night, first extended blackout of its luminescence. Some interpreted mercy, others gathering wrath. Fault lines exposed. "Friday, Doctor." Kent correlated her thermal data with seismic sensors and found a pattern. Each microquake originated directly beneath a historical artifact linked to the 1967 collapse, the girder memorial, the church bell rescued from river mud, a family headstone carved from bridge steel. She plotted the points on a town map, drew connecting lines, and the outline resembled the old bridge's silhouette, superimposed inland like a phantom limb. The courthouse mural sat at the eye of that skeletal outline, pivot point and apex. She presented her findings to Claire first, before press or council. Claire felt the floor sway beneath imagination's weight. "If the land itself is rebuilding memory," Kent said, "then the eye is a weld torch." At dusk, Kent's Faraday sensors pinged. The eye brightened, hotter than recorded to date. Temperature at brick surface hit 98 degrees, steam peeling old paint like skin. The black shroud burst into flame, firefighters hosing it down while radiation spiked to 7.0 morms VHR. Kent's phone alarmed. She merely watched, whispering, "It's burning the tourniquet." Night of the 4 sockets. Past midnight, Route 35 underpass cameras caught movement, a dim luminescence inside each of the 4 empty sockets, faint yet steady, north, south, east, west, eyes lit at the crossroads. Simultaneously, the courthouse eye glowed a matching hue, 5 beacons in silent congress. Traffic cams failed, CB radios hissed. Claire, awakened by citywide text alert, drove to the underpass. Wind howled from nowhere, papers swirling upward instead of sideways. Her recorder displayed ERR again. She smacked it once, twice, no use. From the courthouse square, sirens wailed, not emergency ones, but the parallax's old stage amps, long disconnected, emitting a sustained feedback tone, modulating in the same 3-beat cadence. Click, 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 click. People emerged onto porches, phones raised. Atop the courthouse roof, something darker than night seemed to unfold. No wings this time, just a widening stain of shadow pulling upward, as if the building exhaled its own chimney of darkness. The eye blazed hotter, searing white. Then, as the town held breath, every light extinguished once more. Blackout, silence. A single splash resounded from the river. When power returned 3 minutes later, the courthouse eye was gone. Brick scorched, silhouette erased. The underpass sockets glowed for 3 heartbeats longer, then winked out like dying embers. In that hush, the voice of Tommy Rollins drifted from the riverbank. He stood alone, pointing into the darkness beyond Pier 3. Claire sprinted. Floating downstream, illuminated by moonbreak, drifted a new girder, one that had not lain in salvage yards for decades, one restored to its original silver, edges uncorroded. It glided past the memorial site, buoyed by nothing, stern as Noah's timber, sliding toward open water. Tommy whispered, "The bridge is coming home." Point Pleasant watched the phantom steel slink downriver until morning pallor erased reflections. By sunrise, not a scrap of evidence remained. No scorch on courthouse, no paint on underpass, no foreign girder in any eddy. Yet phones recorded, sensors logged, hearts catalogued. And now the map Dr. Kent had drawn glowed on her office wall beneath black light, invisible phosphors in the paper reacting to stimuli no one else had triggered. The phantom bridge silhouette was complete, spanning land, courthouse at its apex, Pier 3 anchoring its ghostly tail. At the center of the drawn span, between two lines representing vanished trusses, a fresh symbol had appeared overnight, perfect circles, twin eyes, staring back at anyone who dared turn off the room's fluorescent lights. The legend had finished tracing its arterial map upon the living town. Whatever crossed next would not care whether people called it miracle or warning, only that they looked. Chapter 5. Rivets of Memory, Wounds of Light. Morning hushed Point Pleasant, the way snowfall might smother sirens, though the sky was clear and summer blue. No birds sang on the courthouse lawn. Even the cicadas seemed to hold their breath after the night's impossible pageant. By 7 a.m., the State Emergency Management Office had roped in FEMA, National Guard engineers, and a hastily dispatched team from the Department of Energy, all converging on the town like an invasive species of clipboards. 5 keys, 1 lock. Dr. Willa Kent spread her thermal radiation maps across a folding table in the high school gym, now doubling as command center. Each glow event showed an expanding ring of heat that rippled along the phantom bridge outline she'd discovered. At the center, where trusses might once have crossed channels of steel and traffic, she labeled 5 nodes corresponding to the courthouse eye and the 4 underpass sockets. Kent, addressing the room, "Think of them as rivets. 5 rivets holding a structure the eye of science can't see, but every sensor can feel." A skeptical DOE physicist, a broad-shouldered man named Dr. Raj Patel, asked whether local groundwater might conduct rogue electricity. Kent stabbed a finger at her plot. "That girder floated free of physics last night," she said. "You want to blame a puddle?" Patel fell silent. Kent's data glowed like battlefield infrared behind her. No one argued that. The tape in the typewriter. In her apartment, Claire Danner rummaged through archives of Tri-County Observer clippings from 1967 to 68. Yellowed pages described CB interference, dream plagues, and clicking telegraph sounds in the fog. Then she found something she'd missed. An unpublished interview her predecessor, Grant Mercer, conducted with a river dredger named Eldon Pierce a month after the collapse. Half the carbon copy was water-stained, but one passage stabbed her gut. "Pier 3 ain't done fallin'. It's sink-rooted. Steel sunk wrong, memory bent. Bridges remember the weight they bore, same as bones remember breaks. Someday the girders will rise and finish the job they started, build sideways into time." Mercer filed the quote as lunatic ramble. Editors cut it. Claire now felt as though Pierce had written prophecy onto foolscap. She snapped photos of the carbon sheet, emailed them to Kent. Strangers bearing frequencies. Just after noon, a convoy of unmarked vans rolled in from D.C. Men and women in charcoal suits unloaded slim cases and portable masts sprouting dish antennas. Logos were taped over, but Claire caught a badge flash, DARPA Unexplained Atmospheric Research Unit. Their leader, Ms. Adrienne Knox, brushed past reporters with a single statement. "We're here to observe novel ionospheric phenomena. Local authorities remain in charge." Knox's techs erected a phased array transmitter beside Route 35, aiming it directly at the underpass sockets. They pulsed frequencies up the spectrum, hunting for resonance. When they reached 17 kHz, a sub-audible hum you feel more than hear, the four socket eyes flickered on at full brightness as though called to roll call. Gasps rose from the crowd, fenced back 100 yards. Knox ordered the tech to sustain the tone. The courthouse eye, swaddled behind blackened brick, answered, lighting a faint halo, visible even at noon. Kent shouted over the barricade, "You're feeding it!" Knox ignored her, watching oscilloscopes bloom with elegant sinusoid spikes. Then Tommy Rollins, small, hooded, unnoticed, slipped through the legs of onlookers, crossed the police tape, and slammed both palms onto the transmitter's emergency cutoff. The machine died with a clunk. The socket eyes winked out. Silence flooded like cold water. Two soldiers grabbed Tommy. His Uncle Henry screamed for release. Ray Delgado barged past, face thunderous. Tommy spoke only one sentence before anyone could scold him. "You don't hand a match to the forest." The girder whisper. That evening, engineers hauled the spectral clean girder upriver with a tug and chain, planning to crane it onto a flatbed for metallurgical study. As dusk bled amber over the water, the chain links rattled like teeth. 3 clicks echoed from the towboat's radio. The gauge cluster on deck blinked off. The tug's engine stalled mid-current. The girder slipped free, drifted cross-current, and righted itself, floating narrow end forward like a compass needle. Crewmen swore later that an unseen force towed it, keel-steadied, toward the new silver memorial bridge. Spotlight beams shot across the river, but the metal beam vanished in a curtain of mist no radar could pierce. 10 minutes later, the engines restarted as if nothing had happened. The girder was gone. The librarian of lost bridges. At 10 p.m., Claire's phone buzzed. An elderly voice introduced himself. Foster Leary, retired state archivist in Charleston. He'd recognized her name from bylines, remembered her inquiries about the Silver Bridge. Now he had something she might find urgent. Claire drove the midnight 2-hour haul on rural backroads, dashboard lit only by speedometer glow. In the archive's basement, Leary produced a cardboard artifact box labeled State Road Depth, 1927 survey photograms. Inside lay glass negatives of the original bridge site taken before construction. Claire held one to the ceiling bulb. Where the future Pier 3 would stand, the photo showed a dark shape in the water, 2 glaring white circles, grainy yet unmistakable. Scribbled in fountain pen, unidentified lights, reappear each exposure. The note dated 9 June 1927, 40 years before collapse, nearly 50 before Keel's book. Leary tapped the glass plate. "Sometimes what we call legend is the only language an event can afford," he said. "Change the language, you change the event." Claire drove back as dawn hazed pink, the negative strapped to the passenger seat like a holy relic. When her tires rolled into Point Pleasant, every street lamp along Main was already lit at 5:42 a.m. Their bulbs glowed the sodium yellow active only after dark, ignoring the sunrise. The courthouse eye, though charred, shimmered through layers of scorched paint, alive underneath like embers beneath ash. The new survey. Dr. Kent assembled a working group. Claire, Delgado, Patel, even Knox under duress. They overlaid survey maps from 1927, 1967, and 2025 onto the Phantom Bridge heat map. The shape remained constant, but its scale changed, swelling outward inch by inch across decades like a scar keloiding wider. "Expansion suggests growth," Patel said. Kent shook her head. "Not growth, rebuild." She proposed a radical hypothesis. Every traumatic memory Point Pleasant failed to integrate was being externalized as architecture, steel, light, seismic pulse. the town's collective psyche forging literal infrastructure. Knox scoffed until Kent showed her the radiation data matched precisely the decay curves of aged steel alloys, except there was no exposed steel in courthouse brick or underpass concrete. The only steel present had been in the missing girder. What if, Claire ventured, that girder is a missing piece, a bone looking for its skeleton, and these eyes are the welders? Nobody laughed. Reverberation Day. Kent and Claire agreed on a term for the next predicted event, Reverberation Day. By extrapolating thermal pulses and seismic microquakes, Kent calculated the 5-rivet network would fire again within 48 hours, likely drawing more structural fragments into motion. What fragments? The salvage yard still held dozens of original trusses, scheduled for scrap months from now. If they lifted, they could topple houses, slice highways, or worse, assemble over the new bridge, perhaps severing it like an umbilical cord to the present. Mayor Holt faced a nightmare choice: evacuate the town or roll dice with physics gone alchemical. She chose evacuation. Sirens wailed, buses lined streets, and volunteers knocked door to door, urging residents to grab essentials and go. Some refused, memories too heavy to pack. Others wept with relief they never understood they'd needed. Henry hustled Tommy toward a bus. The boy clutched Keel's book and the radiostatic notebook he'd filled with click triplets. "The eyes will follow," he warned softly. Henry tightened grip, said they'd worry later. Alive first, wisdom after. Claire loaded her car with recorders, negatives, and a single overnight bag. She lingered long enough to watch Dr. Kent's team place lead-lined tarps over every underpass socket. Patel's DOE crew deployed boron-filled shields like tiny castle walls. Knox's DARPA unit rolled back their transmitter, publicly obeying evacuation orders, though Claire suspected hidden drones would keep vigil. At 9:13 p.m., the minute the first girder had floated free 3 days ago, Point Pleasant lay nearly deserted, streetlights blinking over empty intersections. In the hush, the courthouse eye glimmered beneath its charred haze, one faint phosphor wink as if testing darkness for witnesses. Claire caught the flash in her rearview. Her heart stuttered. She pressed record one more time and spoke to future archives. "Evacuation complete. Eye active. If you're listening, remember this wasn't about monsters. It was about what we build when we're afraid to look at ruin, and what the ruin builds when it needs us to look back." She drove across the Silver Memorial Bridge, headlights cutting fog. Halfway over, static prickled her speakers. Click, click, click. Click, click, click. She switched the radio off, but the clicks kept pulsing from the engine block itself, vibrating through the steering column like a second heartbeat. Far below, the river answered with a metallic groan. Point Pleasant was emptying, but the bridge, living or dead, had just remembered its name. Chapter 6. Bridge of Echoes. The great evacuation left Point Pleasant looking like a stage after the audience has fled. Traffic lights cycled for no one. Soda cups rolled down Main with the skitter of dry leaves, and the river whispered beneath 2 bridges, one built of tangible steel, the other pieced together from memory and dread. Security checkpoints bracketed each approach span, but mostly they kept journalists from wandering back in. The townspeople had already gone. Claire Danner sat in her hatchback on the Ohio side, recorder balanced on her knee. Every so often she raised binoculars toward the courthouse. Through summer haze she could still make out the charred brick where the eye had blazed. Even from miles away it seemed to twitch, an optical illusion that made her pulse hop. Farther upriver, Dr. Willa Kent and Raj Patel worked from a temporary command trailer, the sort used for wildfire teams. Kent's sleepless eyes tracked 3 windows of sensor data, subsurface strain gauges, magnetometer readings, and an improvised spectral watch that plotted any sudden light emissions. Patel coordinated National Guard spotters posted along the salvage yard fence line. Every 30 minutes, those soldiers confirmed no movement among the trusses. But each new report sounded less certain, like a scout describing fog that might hide an army. Across the roadway, Knox's DARPA crew flew stealth drones through the evacuated streets, mapping invisible currents. One feed revealed a column of cool air rising from the courthouse roof despite the 90-degree heat, a thermal ghost inhaling straight into the sky. The footage looped on a silent monitor, mesmerizing until you grasped that the building itself seemed to breathe. Night fell without fanfare, but the town changed shape in darkness. Sodium street lamps flared where the phantom bridge's outline passed. One by one, bulbs farther away winked out as if starved for power, while those on the skeleton brightened until they hissed. Kent logged each flare point. The pattern matched her rivet map exactly. At 1:07 a.m., the first tremor shivered through the river basin, a pulse so soft it moved only surface water, rippling concentric rings away from Pier 3's memorial stump. Seismographs wrote the faintest wiggle. Claire felt it as a nausea in her teeth. The courthouse eye, still ember-dull, glimmered once, then steadied. Somewhere in the salvage yard, metal groaned. National Guard spotlights swung and caught a single truss beam standing upright, dust sliding from its flanges like sand off a burial shroud. The beam tilted, righted itself, and began to drift, steel skating across gravel without wheels, without noise beyond a low, mournful, resonating hum. Guards shouted, but none stepped in front of the moving mass. Training never covered exorcised architecture. The beam glided through a gap in the fence as if space bent to accommodate its passage, then veered toward Route 35, converging on the underpass sockets now glowing behind lead-lined curtains. Kent radioed Delgado. Eyes are active, rivet sequence underway. Her voice tremored under its own weight. Lights on the Silver Memorial Bridge flickered. Drivers halted on either shore, watching taillights strobe like panicked hearts. Some reversed down on-ramps to escape, others froze, engines idling, hostages to their own rubberneck instinct. Claire abandoned her car, camera rolling, and jogged across the closed pedestrian walkway. From midspan, she saw it all. The rogue truss gliding beneath her onto the old pier's footprint, the courthouse eye blazing white, every socket by the underpass shining like beacons. Together, they illuminated an invisible scaffold spanning the water, a lattice of light where no steel yet existed. Then a second truss emerged from the salvage yard, and a third. Each moved faster than the last, converging on that lattice. When the beams met the glowing nodes, they didn't clang. They merged, edges softening as though welded by light itself. Sparks scattered upward, not downward, drifting skyward like incandescent snow. Patel shouted into his headset for the guard to stage a defensive perimeter. Knox barked at her drone pilots to keep distance. Kent, eyes wide, whispered, "It's building the memory." Above the courthouse, a dark column unfurled, coalescing into the faint outline of broad wings. No detail, just negative space darker than night. The form hovered motionless, but every time a beam slid into position, the shape seemed to thicken, as if gravity were condensing myth into bone. Claire's recorder died in a burst of static. In the silence that followed, she heard the triplet clicks rumble through the bridge deck beneath her feet. Not electronic sound, but metal flexing in code. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click, click. She backed away, heart hammering. The new truss skeleton stretched halfway across the river now, glowing ribs fusing with ghostly ease. Yet even to her untrained eye, something was off. The angle was wrong. Instead of aligning with the present bridge, the lattice skewed slightly north, aiming toward the courthouse square, as if the reconstruction sought land where traffic never ran. Onshore, Tommy Rollins slipped past a barricade and climbed onto an abandoned flatbed stacked with festival stages. He raised a handheld CB to his lips. Every frequency had been silent for days, but when he pressed transmit, the air crackled. "Stop building," Tommy commanded, voice thin yet piercing through the stillness. "The town's not there anymore." The courthouse eye flared. Every rivet point flashed like arc lamps. For one breathless instant, the entire half-finished skeleton pulsed red, then froze in place. Steel beams hovering above river mist, motionless. Tommy lowered the mic. Kent's sensors screamed overload. Drones bucked as magnetic fields spiked. Bridge lights cut out. Darkness swallowed all but the burning rivets, now bright as suns. With a sound like a distant choir inhaling, the truss lattice imploded, drawing inward, compacting into a single point above Pier 3. Light collapsed into a marble-sized star, winking once, twice, then extinguishing. The salvaged beams fell into the river with delayed thunder, geysers shooting sky-high. Spray rained over the memorial, sizzling where droplets met hot brick. Silence rushed in, so absolute, Claire heard her own blood in her ears. She trained her lens on the courthouse. The eye had vanished. Only blackened stone remained, scarred but dull. Underpass sockets, too, had gone dark. Sirens started on distant patrol cars. Generators clicked. Knox's drones whirred back to stable flight. Over field radios, Delgado ordered immediate sweep for casualties. None were reported. Kent stood at her trailer door, rain of disturbance plastering her hair to her forehead, and laughed once, a brittle, startled sound. "It chose halt," she said. "Or maybe the boy chose halt for it." Claire turned to find Tommy, but the flatbed was empty. Henry Rollins sprinted from the checkpoint, calling his nephew's name. No one had seen the child leave. Dawn limped across the horizon, pale and tremulous. River fog clung to shattered beams bobbing in lazy eddies. Salvage crews would find each piece strangely unmarred, as if dropped fresh from a fabricator's crane. News outlets would declare the phenomenon a mass hallucination magnified by panic and electromagnetic interference. DARPA's official statement would cite experimental field effect anomalies, implying their own equipment failed. In a private memo, Knox would admit they witnessed an unclassifiable force demonstrating selective mechanical manipulation. Point Pleasant's residents would return over the next week to find their courthouse scorched, their underpass defaced, but their new bridge intact. A miracle or a warning, interpretations split down old fault lines of belief. Claire's editor pressed her for a headline. She filed 6 words, "When memory builds, will we pay?" He added a subheader without her consent. "Local boy still missing after incident." The town posted Tommy's photograph on telephone poles already warped by summer heat. In every picture, his eyes glinted with the same mischievous brightness that once haunted a courthouse wall. Search parties scoured riverbanks. Divers combed eddies. No trace surfaced. Yet some nights, long after curfew, truckers crossing the Silver Memorial Bridge report clicks on their radios. 3 notes, a pause, 3 notes, followed by a child's voice. "Wrong address. Try again tomorrow." The signal always fades before they can respond, leaving only the hush of water beneath steel. Chapter 7. The Voice in the Static. The missing child flyers fluttered like frightened birds on every lamppost. Tommy Rollins, age 14, last seen near salvage yard. Below the grainy school photo, red ink bled into damp summer paper, raindrop halos around his eyes. Point Pleasant's grief had always attached itself to images. Now it found a fresh portrait to haunt. Search teams combed riverbanks at dawn, boots sinking in silt, still laced with bright flecks of welding slag from the night the trusses fell. Henry Rollins staggered beside the K9 unit, Keel's paperback stuffed in his jacket like a misplaced heart. Each time a dog barked at driftwood, he lurched forward, desperate to retrieve more than a stick. Divers dragged sonar sleds through slow eddies, mapping black shapes that always resolved into harmless junk. A shopping cart, a carnival chair, an old boat prop. Claire Danner spent her nights in the makeshift press tent, cataloguing testimonials that blurred fact and nightmare. A trucker swore the New Bridge's guardrails flexed when he crossed at 2 a.m., bowing outward like lungs. An elderly widow claimed her television glowed even when unplugged, revealing a single scrolling sentence, "Not yet the right angle." Every story felt like another puzzle piece thrown into a bottomless box. Dr. Willa Kent moved headquarters to the abandoned high school library, a bunker of dust and circling silverfish. There she pinned satellite photos, seismograph tapes, and Claire's 1927 glass negative onto corkboards until the walls resembled a constellation chart. In the hush between fluorescent flickers, she could almost glimpse a hidden geometry. 5 rivet points arrayed like knuckles, truss paths curving inward like fingers, a phantom fist clenched around the town's heart. The Department of Energy packed its trailers and left under cover of night, citing mission complete. DARPA stayed behind, but Adrienne Knox's once brisk confidence had curdled into suspicion. Her drones showed minute fluctuations, pulses of microwave haze, emanating not from the courthouse ruins, but from the empty salvage yard where the trusses had stood before their midnight march. Something still breathed among the weeds and stripped bolts. On the 4th night without Tommy, the static returned. Radios citywide jumped from silence to frantic triplet clicks, the beat frenetic, almost playful. They cut out, replaced by a boy's voice whispering 2 syllables. Wrong bridge. The transmission repeated twice, then dissolved into white hiss that tasted of ozone. Chief Ray Delgado triangulated the signal to a rusted switching station on the riverbank, decommissioned since the 1980s. He led a SWAT light squad through broken doors and found only cobwebs, shattered vacuum tubes, and a single spiral notebook on the concrete floor. Inside, every page displayed the 3-click pattern drawn in tight black loops. On the final leaf, scrawled in rush-streaked graphite, "Bring the heart to the water." Henry, summoned to identify the handwriting, confirmed it was Tommy's. The cryptic command fractured the town into factions. Some argued it meant pure faith. Prayer vigils formed along the levee, candles reflected in oil-slick water. Others demanded hard science. Kent recalibrated magnetometers, convinced the heart referenced an electromagnetic anomaly at Pier 3. Claire alone thought of Linda's iridescent stone, long forgotten on the nightstand of a house boarded since the first evacuation. She retrieved it at dusk. In her palm, the stone pulsed with subtle warmth, opalescent swirls shifting like northern lights under skin. The nearer she walked to the river, the brighter it glowed, until its small light seemed to braid with the courthouse's scorched facade, ash-black brick vibrating faintly, as though remembering how to shine. A thunderstorm massed over Kentucky, grumbling across the state line. Wind whipped banners free of their ties, shutters banged. The unfinished carnival ride squealed on rusted bearings. Lightning stitched the horizon, illuminating the salvage yard where weeds now parted in channels, as if invisible beams still shuffled across gravel, practicing a reconstruction only they could see. Kent's spectrometers spiked. She patched her laptop feed to every phone left in the emergency network. Thermal flux at Pier 3. Delgado sounded the evacuation sirens again. They wailed over empty streets, softened by rain. Claire reached the memorial stump, stone blister-hot in her fist. Water churned at the base where the steel rebar inside the concrete crackled with tiny sparks. One by one, the submerged truss pieces, not the ones that moved before, but those still rusting in the mud since 1967, shivered free of silt and began to float. They rose slowly, ancient bones dripping long ribbons of riverweed, each fragment rotating to align with an unseen axis pointing inland. The stone in Claire's hand blazed white. Static burst from a nearby patrol radio, good angle now, spoken in Tommy's calm alto. Henry, soaked through, crashed through the reeds yelling his nephew's name. The floating beams halted mid-current, bobbing like obedient leviathans awaiting orders. Claire stepped forward, knelt, and placed the stone atop the water. It did not sink. Surface tension cupped it. Brightness diffused beneath the ripples. The concrete stump groaned. From its cracked center, a tendril of light uncoiled, touching the stone like a filament finding its bulb. For a heartbeat, every surviving bulb in town flashed on. Abandoned homes, dark storefronts, even the scorched courthouse interior glowed. The underpass sockets ignited again, 4 inland stars marking a cross. Above the salvage yard, a sheet of lightning froze in place, sculpted into the negative image of wings, electric blood vessels branching across cloud base. The river-borne trusses pivoted and drifted toward shore, guided by nothing Claire could see. When their ends kissed the old pier foundation, they fused with a hiss of steam, metal annealing as if centuries of rust reversed in seconds. A half-arch of resurrected steel now jutted into the storm, incomplete, yearning. Radios clicked thrice, paused, thrice. Tommy's voice, distant but certain. "Need last piece." Henry wept, voice hoarse. "Tell me what you want, kiddo." The rain answered, sheets drumming the river until patterns emerged, tight triplets on the water's skin, echoing the code. Kent recorded audio, ran it through a spectrogram. The visual showed a perfect silhouette of the missing boy, arms raised like semaphore. She whispered, "Tommy is the last piece." Lightning struck the new steel arch, traveling its curve, grounding into the stump. The current leapt into the stone on the water's surface, shattering it in a spray of rainbow shards. Where each fragment plunged, a tiny whirlpool spun, glowing briefly before snuffing out. Claire felt the pull, every shard beckoned, promising completion. And she knew the bridge would keep building until the boy, or something fashioned from his memory, slotted into its geometry. Thunder rolled, a sound like iron longing for form. Storm wind wrenched the missing child posters from lampposts, lifting Tommy's face skyward. One flyer snagged on the half-arch, plastering across hot steel. The paper burst into flame, then dissolved. A bright after-image imprinted on the truss looked eerily like the outline of a heart. Knox barked orders to drone operators, stand down, but her voice broke. The storm deafened every frequency except the triple clicks, steady, patient, unstoppable. Claire turned to Henry. "If we find him," she said, "we have to ask whether bringing him back finishes the bridge or stops it forever." Henry wiped rain from his eyes, stared at the partial arch glowing in strobing lightning. "I just want my boy," he said. The river hissed as more rusted beams surfaced, orbiting like satellites waiting for a final command. Above them, the electric wings contracted, preparing to beat. And Point Pleasant realized the legend had become a question. Which matters more, restoring what was lost, or choosing to leave the ruin unfinished? The storm held its breath, waiting for an answer. Chapter 8. Last Span to Nowhere. Dawn leaked into the storm's bruised underbelly, but never reached the ground. Instead, a greasy twilight lingered over Point Pleasant, making street lamps look like tired sentries that forgot to clock out. The half-built spectral arch crouched above the river, an animal tensed mid-leap, while the salvage yard's resurrected beams hovered in silent formation downstream, drifting against the current as if the Ohio were a slow conveyor delivering parts to an invisible assembly line. Lightning still quivered across a low ceiling of cloud, tracing the outline of vast wings that refused to dissipate, a black signature repeating the question nobody dared answer. Claire paced the levee road with her camera unplugged, its battery fried during the night's electromagnetic tantrum. She recorded notes on paper now, ink streaking every time wind flung rain against the page. What worried her wasn't the machinery of the haunting, but the stillness inside her own heart. A numbed place that accepted the impossible bridge the way one accepts sunrise, because arguing with either was pointless. She wondered if that detachment was surrender or the only armor left. "Doctor?" Willa Kent crunched numbers beside a bank of humming generators that looked as fragile as cardboard in the electric storm. Her newest model predicted that once the final span locked into place, the structure's mass would exceed what purely physical beams could support. The rest would be stored potential, borrowed from memory, from grief, from whatever dark physics had harmonized with the town's collective wound. If that threshold was crossed, the model suggested two fates. The bridge would either solidify, rewriting material law and binding its unseen creator to Point Pleasant forever, or collapse again with enough force to shear the memorial span and flood the valley in twisted debris. She told no one the odds favored the second outcome. Her breath hitched each time another beam rose from the water. Adrian Knox watched from the DARPA command van, jaw clenched. The agency no longer spoke of observation. Overnight, a terse order arrived from Washington. Prevent foreign adversaries from acquiring any anomalous material. Knox interpreted that to mean confiscate, contain, exploit. She had armed tactical teams ready to snatch whatever artifact fused next, be it stone, steel, or child. None of her soldiers looked eager. Every time static popped over their headsets 3 beats at a time, they paled, fingers flexing at triggers they were no longer sure could protect them. Chief Ray Delgado stood alone under the courthouse portico, staring at bricks still faintly warm where the eye had burned. He remembered the collapse, the smell of coolant and blood, the way the deck plates skidded like playing cards into the dark. And he felt the same premonition now, that sensation of history holding its breath before exhaling tragedy. His deputies begged him to leave town with the last bus, but duty outlived courage. He would not abandon the hollow houses or the posters with Tommy's face curling in humidity. Henry Rollins refused to leave the riverbank. He kept expecting his nephew to wade from the mist, carrying Linda's shattered stone, or waving that copy of Keel's book like a flare. Instead, he found only bubbles where beams surfaced, and those bubbles smelled metallic, like old pennies and ozone. When volunteers guided him toward shelter, he shrugged them off. Each raindrop felt like penance, each gust like a scold. He replayed Tommy's final words, wrong bridge, turning them until they meant everything and nothing. The day split open at 11:11 a.m. Seismic sensors registered a vertical jolt, the largest yet, rippling outward in 3 pulse waves no natural fault could mimic. Sirens short-circuited, falling silent mid-wail. Streetlights along the phantom outline flared brilliant white, then shattered, showering sparks that fizzled on wet asphalt. The underpass sockets reignited, 4 lighthouses aimed inland. And from somewhere in that buzzing vacuum of power, the boy's voice echoed again, this time audible to human ears, not just radios. Wrong bridge. Find the heart. The words rolled across town like wind chased by thunder. Kent's equation jumped lines of code she hadn't written, spilling new variables that spelled coordinates at Pier 3. Delgado pushed off the courthouse pillar and ran, water boot-slapping behind him. Claire followed, adrenaline drumming fear into submission. They converged at the memorial stump where the half-arch met river stones. The shattered iridescent fragments lay scattered along the bank, their usual glow absent, dull as broken shells. Yet each piece hummed, for Kent's spectrograph app leapt, showing frequencies identical to those that once pulsed from the courthouse eye. Claire knelt, collecting shards in her shoulder bag, ignoring the heat that scorched her fingertips. The river churned. Another beam surfaced, this one crowned with the rust-gnawed remnants of a bridge nameplate whose lettering had long been lost to river acid. It rose upright, then pivoted toward the shore, as a child might drag a stick through mud. 40 feet of steel glided closer, parting mist, until its pointed end hovered before the memorial stump, trembling like a compass needle over true north. Delgado barked for everyone to back away. No one did. Lightning arced from cloud to steel, from steel to stump, white-hot veins welding beam to concrete. When the glare faded, the rust was gone, replaced by polished silver, the nameplate miraculously restored. Silver Bridge, 1928. Letters glowed like brand new neon, an impossible resurrection. Delgado swore, crossing himself with numbed fingers. Kent whispered that the phantom scaffold needed only one more element, the keystone piece spanning the court square rivet, the heart. She eyed the bag of shards. Claire zipped it shut, stepping back. "Not these," she said. "They're broken memories, not a heart." Across the river, salvage lights revealed a small figure on the water, standing atop the mirrored surface like a pale reflection come alive. Tommy. He faced the half-arch, feet planted on nothing but ripple. A halo of static fire circled him, whispering 3 clicks between each raindrop. Henry shouted his name. The boy didn't turn. Claire lifted her camera. Still dead. The moment would linger only in memory now. Tommy raised both arms and spoke, but the voice carried from every radio, every walkie, every cell speaker left on. "Bring the heart to me." Knox's tactical team sprinted forward, rifles raised, not at the boy, but at Claire's bag, belief that the shards were pivotal overriding orders. Delgado blocked them, sidearm drawn for the first time in 20 years. "Lower it," he growled. The stalemate carved lightning into stone. While adults argued, Kent noticed a different glow upstream. A final beam, smallest of all, drifted free, capped with a circular joint where 2 trusses once met, still crusted with concrete from a roadway panel. Kent shouted, "The deck plate!" She realized then, the heart wasn't stone or boy, but the last breath of the bridge's roadway, the place where tire treads and human lives intersected, trauma's pulse point. But the plate veered off course, current pushing it back toward the salvage yard. The scaffold lacked magnetism now, the structure hungry yet weak. Kent turned to Claire, eyes wild. "We need signal alignment. Another click code from the source. The boy is the transmitter." Claire cupped her hands to her mouth, screaming across water. "Tommy, tell it where to go!" The boy faced west, toward the drifting plate, and tapped his chest 3 times. Radios echoed click, click, click. The plate jolted, changed direction, sliding upriver as if steam-powered. Water parted, waves slapped levees, the beam's inertia hummed an eerie lullaby. But halfway to the half-arch, the plate hit slack current and stalled. The clicks sputtered, drowned by a roar overhead. Knox's drones swooped out of clouds, targeting Tommy with rope fire stun nets, her last gambit to capture conduit and stone at once. A nylon mesh ballooned toward the child. Delgado fired, one thundercrack, severing the net tether. The drone spun and crashed, sparks sizzled on water. Knox screamed orders, lost in wind. A second drone banked, but lighting coiled out of the cloud wings and sheared it in half, metal shards raining like silver hail. The scaffold beams vibrated louder, frequencies flirting with structural resonance. Kent knew the valley's glass would implode if that crescendo peaked. Light flared from Claire's bag, shards fusing through fabric, blinding hot. She yanked the strap off her shoulder, hurled the bag into the river. The fragments bobbed like lantern beetles, swarming toward the stalled plate, collecting along its rusty seams. As each shard attached, rust receded, color bleaching to pristine steel. Tommy stepped backward, arms lowering. He looked suddenly smaller. The static halo dimmed. He whispered, impossibly audible above storm, "Thank you." Then he fell backward into the water, or through it. There was no splash, only a ripple expanding outward, empty center swallowing rain. Henry screamed. Delgado grabbed him. Claire watched, tears lining her rain-soaked face, powerless. The roadway plate surged forward, magnetized by the glowing shards, final ligament connecting to the arch. A seismic boom rolled beneath feet, grief's subsonic heartbeat. The partial bridge completed its span, an ethereal arc over real steel, meeting the shore below the courthouse square with monstrous grace. For one stunning second, the phantom bridge solidified, trusswork gleaming silver, roadway glimmering with neon letters that spelled "Stop." Drivers on the memorial span braked, slack-jawed, watching an apparition more real than the memories they suppressed. Lights along the phantom deck flicked red to green, as if inviting traffic from some alternate timeline. Then the countdown ended. Every eye erupted in incandescence. Courthouse, underpass, 2 points above salvaged wings, blazing sun-white. The phantom bridge shattered into pure light, beams vaporizing into vaporous shards that blew across the valley like glittering pollen. Windows howled inward. Radio static spiked, then died. The memorial bridge rocked but held, gusset plates groaning like whales, steel flexing but refusing to snap. When sight returned, Pier 3's memorial stump lay smooth, concrete vitrified into black glass. Every rusted remnant of the old span was gone. The underpass showed only rain-dark concrete. The courthouse facade, once scarred, gleamed newly repointed as if masons had repaired it overnight, no trace of an eye. Silence dropped, heavy and absolute. Then raindrops resumed, ordinary and cold. Henry knelt at the river's edge where Tommy vanished. Only Linda's stone remained, no longer iridescent, just grey quartz flecked with dull veins. He clutched it to his chest, weeping into the storm, Keel's paperback sinking below the tide beside him. Kent's sensors flatlined. No radiation, no anomalous heat, only ordinary readings. "It's over," she muttered, though her voice tremored with uncertainty because some phenomena never end. They only sleep. Knox's surviving team packed without words, frightened of what Washington might ask next. Delgado holstered his sidearm, gaze on the intact memorial span. Claire closed her soaked notebook, ink smeared into unreadable sigils. She realized the story's final act would never fit any headline. 3 days later, evacuees returned to find their town eerily improved. Potholes filled by molten glass runoff, dead streetlights resurrected, the courthouse facade gleaming like new construction. Insurance adjusters would call it vandalism and file claims under Act of God. Those words felt right, though nobody at the bar dared say them aloud. The missing child posters came down after a month, replaced by freshly painted murals. No wings this time, only river silhouettes and fern shapes curled like protective arms. Tourists still arrived, but they bought fewer t-shirts. Something about the valley's hush discouraged easy jokes. By winter, the salvage yard was cleared, sold to the state for a wildlife refuge where migratory herons nested among reeds. Every now and then, just before dawn, a lone trucker on Route 35 swears he sees a slim figure standing mid-span over dark water, boy-shaped, rain-translucent. The CB crackles 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats. When the trucker looks twice, the deck is empty, but the guardrails vibrate faintly as if brushed by a passing memory. And some nights, in houses where grief still lingers, a stone on a nightstand warms for no reason, glowing just enough to illuminate a heartbeat too fragile to name. Those who notice rarely speak of it. They simply place the stone on a windowsill and watch its light fade with the morning, grateful and frightened by turns. Because Point Pleasant learned at last that miracles and warnings are siblings. Sometimes they build bridges, other times they dismantle them so that living hearts can learn to be their own architecture. The town still stands, the river still whispers, and somewhere beyond the glow of highway lamps, the echo of 3 soft clicks waits, Patient as tide, ready to begin again should memory seek new rivets. If the shadows along your road ever flicker, remember the voices in the static, and keep watching our channel for more true tales that hide behind the ordinary. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this story so the river of memory never runs dry. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your bridges unbroken.